Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to AI for Good. We hope that you, your friends, your family members, and colleagues are all keeping healthy and safe. My name is Fred Werner from the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and it's a privilege for me to introduce today's webinar. Now, the ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies, and we're also the organizers of the AI for Good Global Summit alongside XPRIZE Foundation in partnership with 38 UN sister agencies, ACM, and co-convened with Switzerland. Now, the goal of the summit is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the Sustainable Development Goals and figure out how to scale those solutions for global impact. Now, I'd like to think that one of our claims to fame is that we are action-oriented and we are more than just a talk shop, and I believe that today's session is a perfect example of that. The AI Summit has delivered on its action-oriented promise by generating a number of very important collaborations and pre-standardization efforts around the use of AI in healthcare, in autonomous driving, in energy efficiency, in natural disaster management, in machine learning and 5G, and we also launched the Global Initiative on AI and Data Commons. And today's webinar is no exception, as we will look at how XPRIZE launched the Pandemic Response Challenge in record time, generating groundbreaking solutions and very important learnings that we can all benefit from. But before I introduce today's moderator, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping issues. First of all, your microphone has been disabled, so please use the Q&A and chat if you wish to communicate. It's the role of the moderator to identify questions and ask them to the panelists, and we're counting on your active participation to have a very interactive session. Now, before I begin, I have a challenge for you. Can you please use the chat function and simply type in where you're coming from? Just type in your city, your organization, wherever you may be. And please make sure you mark it chat to everyone and not to just the panelists. Here, I'll go first and I'll type in Geneva, Switzerland. Okay. Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, Mexico, India, Ontario, Nottingham, UK, Geneva, Mexico, Berlin, Spain. Wow, they keep coming in, and this is really testament that it really is a global audience. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's moderator. His name is Amir Bani Fatemi, and he's the Chief Innovation Officer of XPRIZE Foundation, and he's also one of the pillars of the AI for Good Global Summit since the very beginning. So Amir, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Fred, and it's a pleasure to join again the series of webinars we've started a year ago. It's been exactly a year when we all went into confinement and starting doing our events online. And what a year it was. We have learned definitely a number of things. AI for Good was from the beginning an intention to create a global conversation and a dialogue, but also an action-oriented effort about how we can come together to solve for sustainable development goals. And as machine learning and data and artificial intelligence is more and more prevalent and pervasive into any aspect of our life, we try to understand together how we can apply AI more efficiently to solving the sustainable development goals, but also how can AI becomes a force for good, while it can also be a force for bad. And this dialogue have also showed us that in fact, action is important and collaboration is important. So when the pandemic hit and we all had to go into confinement, the conversation was how can we play a role and have an impact into making society go back to normal, keeping people safe, and understanding how we can be more resilient. And this effort was not only done by us, a number of organizations globally did that. And I think we have to recognize the global coming together for combating COVID-19 and also getting back to business and keep people safer. On our side, because with ITU, XPRIZE and ITU have been started this conversation about impact of AI on society, and we had some background on creating frameworks and getting organizers together and data science and machine learning experts and problem owners together, we thought about how can we actually play a role into combating COVID. And we naturally created a gathering about all the partners we're working with, and we come up with an alliance to combat COVID, and we called it the Pandemic Alliance. Out of this pandemic, a number of projects came out. Of course, we worked about improving masks, and we worked about rapid testing, we worked about improving health logistics, working with vaccines. But one thing was globally perceived, which was the difficulty to make predictions about how help people navigate the difficulty of confinement and keep helping businesses open. And this duality of intervention was different from city to city, from community to community. We took on this effort and we met with one of the members of the alliance, which was Cognizant Corporation. And Cognizant have been also working on their own into modeling and prediction of interventions. So naturally, as an AI for good approach, we tried to figure out how XPRIZE can play a role and how XPRIZE, along with ITU and the conventional AI for good, can play a role. You probably heard some of you during the breakthrough days in 2020, in the fall of 2020, we talked about access to pandemic, and I mentioned this project before. But today we'd like to share about how this project went, what we did, and what we hope to go together with all of you. So if you can show me the next slide. XPRIZE is an organization that launched very massive challenges that are multi-year sometimes and include a number of countries. But at the speed of COVID, we had to do something very fast. And this challenge that we launched was launched in November of 2020 and lasted 3 months. And what we were able to accomplish in 3 months is really remarkable. In the context of AI for Good in action, the idea was that how can we crowdsource and ask the global community to come up with predictive models and prescriptions to help policymakers, health authorities, any community to make decisions about what to do when we need to have interventions in place. Next slide, please. So today we're gonna be welcoming, thanks to my colleague Susan Emmer, which I'm going to be introducing shortly, a panel with 2 leaders. The first one, I'm going to help Susan explain that, but 2 leaders to talk about what we did and how we did it and what was the impact. And then we're going to talk about next steps. Next slide, please. The competition that we launched was a $500,000 competition. In fact, we amount to 1 million almost. But this competition was about asking teams to build AI-driven system to accurately predict the transmission rate of COVID-19 and also prescribe intervention mitigation measures, such as what if we close a school? What if we open up a dispensary? What if we allow more cars to drive during certain time of the day? All of these decisions have an impact, of course, on how people be more safe or stay at home or be confined. So this balance of decision-making between keeping people safe and going along with life as normal was not easy. So the teams had to develop both a predictor and a prescriptor. And the goal was to create a collaborative system, an ecosystem, and an environment for all to work together to create regional plans for future pandemics as well. So the learning that we have gathered will actually be able to be used for in the future. Next slide, please. So the sponsor of this prize, as I mentioned, Cognizant is a partner and part of the Pandemic Alliance and working with us on AI for Good as well. But also Cognizant came very strongly by recognizing the need to push this forward and became the sponsor to allow us to have the prize purse to recognize the winning teams. Next slide. But nothing gets done alone. And of course, naturally with ITU, we came together with this framework and the number of the partners joined us. Of course, the Amazon provided cloud computing for competitors. University of Texas, University of Oxford were determinant in their support, along with City of Los Angeles, a number of firms such as Alpha Intelligence Capital, Intel Corporations, and Wellcome Predictive, which is a hedge fund, and not forgetting the IEEE. One of the reasons why we were able to do this was the first was University of Oxford that provided to us data sets of predictors and actual policies that were implemented in different cities. So the policy data sets was the foundation for the models to be built, and Cognizant provided the first baseline model to get teams started. So the combination of the first baseline model and the data set from Oxford was what we provided to all the teams to get started and to build their own models. Next slide, please. Obviously, we had a global response. We had 300 teams from 34 countries. You can see the visual here in front of you. And then these teams worked for 3 months. The first stage was to build a predictor. And then upon a leaderboard that was designed and the validation of the judges, some of the teams went to the final, and then they'd be given the opportunity to create what we call a prescriptor, which is proposing scenarios to policymakers to help them with decision-making process. Next slide. The summary of this, the team winners, we have the 2 winners of this competition, Team Valencia from Valencia, Spain. And the next slide is Team JSI from Slovenia. Later on during this webinar, we're going to share with you when this team will come back at the next episode to share with you what they did, how they did it, and what was the learning on this. Next slide. So in summary, we had 366 teams pre-registered. 103 of them participated fully in the competition from 34 countries. We awarded cash prizes and Amazon credit for a total of $1 million. The duration was 3 months, a record time for any prizes that we did at this scale. And then we had 2 prize winners and 8 honorable mentions. This effort couldn't have been done, of course, without the collaboration of a number of players, because it's not easy to come together and do this in such a rapid time. So today we're not showing you the result, we're not showing the details, that would be for a different episode, but today is about understanding how collectively we came together and the number of teams worked out of the same starting model to build different models and to share all of the model publicly. And what we go from here and how we can actually activate a larger community to continue this work. Imagine we could have predictive models available at any given time for any community, not only for COVID, but for many other threats. What would that be? And this is the conversation we'd like to have today, and then get you situated and introduced to the project and where we're going from here. I'd like to introduce Susan Emmer, my colleague, who's the Vice President of Alliances and Stakeholder Relations at XPRIZE, that will conduct the panel and help us introduce our 2 guests today, 2 speakers, and dive into the detail of what we have done and where we're going from here. Susan, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amir, and thank you, Frederick. So welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today to be your moderator for the conversation around AI for Good in action. Through XPRIZE, I've actually been involved with ITU and AI for Good for over 4 years. I even got to attend the summit in Geneva, and I honestly can't wait till we can all get back together in person so I can see all my colleagues and also replenish my stockpile of Swiss chocolate. So let's move on. Let me introduce you to our panelists today. First up, we have Chae-Sub Lee. Chae-Sub was elected the director of the ITU Telecommunications Standardization Bureau at the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference 2014 at the Republic of Korea. And he was re-elected to this post for a second 4-year term in the conference in 2018 in Dubai. Dr. Lee has contributed ICT standardization for over 30 years, specializing in such areas as integrated services, digital networks, ISDN, global information infrastructure, GII, internet protocol, next generation networks, NGN, internet protocol television, IPTV, and cloud computing. He started his professional life in 1986 as a researcher at Korea Telecom. After 17 years, he took up a role at the country's Electronics and Telecommunications Research Institute, ETRI, where he stayed for the next 8 years. Most recently, he worked at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, KAIST, as a senior advisor to Korea's Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning. Within ITU, Dr. Lee served as chairman of the ITU Focus Group on Next Generation Networks to address the growing need for international standards for NGN, including service requirements, functional architecture, mobility security, and quality of service, QoS. Chae-Sub, you win the prize for the most acronyms in a bio ever. Okay, moving on to Brett. Brett Greenstein. Brett is the Senior Vice President and Global Head of AI and Analytics for Cognizant. Brett leads Cognizant's Global Artificial Intelligence and Analytics Business Unit. focused on helping transform their clients with the most differentiated capabilities and offerings for data, modernization, and AI. The AI and A business unit supports core capabilities for their clients' overall digital transformation. Brett is also helping to drive AI and data transformation across Cognizant's business units and to lead the effort on responsible AI for the company. Prior to this, Brett led IBM Watson's Internet of Things offerings, establishing new IoT products and services for the industrial Internet of Things. He built his career in technology and business leadership across a range of roles throughout IBM in software, services, consulting, strategy, marketing, and as IBM's CIO for Asia Pacific. He has worked globally in these roles, including living in China for 5 years, working with clients and transforming IBM's IT environment. So it's very clear we have two extraordinarily accomplished and interesting panelists. So let's get started. So the first question is for Brett. Brett, how was crowdsourcing a determinant in the success of the pandemic response challenge?
It was essential. I think that the challenge, the pandemic we all faced was so large and overwhelming and also rapid in its proliferation across the world that the idea that any one group could possibly make a dent in this problem was unthinkable. And yet there were pockets of people doing incredible work. Within Cognizant, we had associates who are deeply passionate data scientists who also care a lot about community. And without approvals or asking permission, they just started working on what was possible using AI to get predictive models. They were looking at the data sets available around the world. Oxford had begun to publish some initial data sets around the spread of the disease, but they also used crowdsourced data. They had armies of volunteers scraping websites and Twitter feeds and everything else to understand the policies for intervention that were going on. They brought all that together into a data set that everyone could access. We partnered with them and began using that data, and the insights were profound. This was still in the April and May timeframe, and already we were able to predict that we wouldn't be able to get children back into schools, for example, even into August and September last year. So I had family members asking me, are we going to college in the fall? And I said, you're not, you're going to be at home. Don't buy sheets, don't buy furniture, be ready. Remote education is coming. And it was hard to believe in April and May that we would still be in that position, but the models told us that was true. And I think what it really touched on for all of us was the power of collaborative data and collaborative AI was immense. And what we were looking for was a way to amplify that. And it was in the conversations with Amir and XPRIZE that it became really clear that perhaps we could mobilize far more data scientists to really put a spotlight on this and to find new and more innovative ways to see what's coming ahead. I don't think it could have been done without crowdsourcing.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you. It really is true about the power of collaborative data. So Chesa, how do you see this type of crowdsourced response to pandemics being further supported and replicated on a global level?
Let me start with this as a basic. The public owns so many of data by nature and has a very serious responsibility to use of data for good. I believe this crowdsourcing is one of ways to how we can collect all this public interest together. Especially, this public has some very interesting features like one domain of public has a stronger relationship with the other domain of public. I believe this relationship will be a crucial role to extend the value of data. We are sharing the data based on each public's responsibility. I believe there's each crowdsourcing project, public project have their own responsibility, I believe, but this should be connected together. But however, so I think it's the public-oriented project in this regard is very useful and suitable approach to demonstrate this benefit of this data for good. But however, we should seriously take into account how we have issued security and privacy. So very unfortunately, we often saw some problems, some like community activities or public projects in terms of this security and privacy. So each public domain should enhance their own integrity as well as ensuring the situation of all connected public domains. So taking into account of these perspectives, replication or application of such a project in global scale would be, I want to say, it's a way of to extending the value of data to global public benefits. But as I said before, this would be more challenging because this needs global agreement with a very stringent but more inclusive governance policy. So which should take quite a long time, take into account of the something difference of these communities. So I'm wondering if those timing issue might be a fundamental hurdle, but in any case, I would encourage, we will challenge any places where available as soon as possible. We have to try to implement such a collaboration effort on those areas.
No, thank you very much. That was an excellent perspective. Brett, from the perspective of a global service provider such as Cognizant, what were the key learnings from this challenge for both you and the community?
You know, a few different areas. One, there were business learnings, there were technology learnings, and there's also societal learnings. I think from a business perspective, and Amir touched on this, I learned how fast companies can operate when we all have a shared sense of urgency. And we turn this around extremely rapidly. The ability to coordinate, organize, get volunteers, to get funding, to build events, to build marketing, all of this stuff happened at a speed I've never seen before. AWS and ourselves and Intel and Oxford and XPRIZE, all of us just getting on phones and solving problems really fast. So the speed at which companies can operate is not always the way companies do operate. But I think a sense of shared urgency and shared vision really made that happen. From a technology perspective, it was also really clear that whatever work we had done, which I thought was really profound, our predictive and prescriptive models, it was when multiple teams came together, the additive effect of their models is actually better than any one model. So we learned very quickly that it was the combined view of all of these models that actually produced a much more accurate and powerful insight than any one model could. This is a lesson for business, a lesson for government, a lesson for all of us. Anyone who thinks they have the perfect model is absolutely wrong. And it's really when they bring them together that it gets better. And from a societal perspective, I think it was this idea that while there's a global pandemic, there are highly localized impacts. The data itself exposed how localized it was at a country, at a state level in various countries. And companies, our clients, also realized that the models they used to run their business before were kind of broad brush macro models, but it has to go down really to the country, to the state, to the city, to the town level. That's where stuff happens. And that's where there were huge variations in the pandemic, but also there's variations in lots of parts of our lives. I think thinking globally and acting locally became the dominant theme through the pandemic.
No, that's so true. And I really do, the whole thing about the shared sense of urgency and the shared vision, being at XPRIZE for 6 years, this was the fastest, it was 3.5 months. And that included, pre-launch and team recruitment and solution development and judging. And it was all in 3.5 months. And it was the fastest prize that we ever did in history. So a lot of learnings from it. But to your point, Brett, it was really, it evolved because of a shared sense of urgency and a shared vision and working with partners such as yourself. All right, so Chase, you're the standards guy, right? So as we see all these efforts converging to help address the uncertainty of reopening society and restarting economies, do you see any form or blueprint or a standard shaping up out of this?
Yeah, I'd like to highlight the importance of this global collaboration to mitigate this economic keeping the people safe. As Brett said of this, COVID as something localized, some nature of this localized, but we also find we witnessed during this COVID even in just one national level, single effort does not work well under this COVID environment. Mm-hmm. So all we recognized, global effort is required as a mandatory. Is this not anymore an option to overcome this COVID? So this is a really ironical issue. We are all confined in our house, but the solution is in global level. Without this global solution, we could move it. So in this regard, not exactly the same sense, but I too, we are enjoyed pretty much of some benefits from various global collaboration initiatives. For example, we have a Fiji Financial Global Initiative with collaboration with the World Bank and some the Bill Gates and Melinda Foundations, AI for Health with WHO, AI and Data Commons with XPRIZE together, Machine Learning 5G Global Challenges, and United for Smarter Sustainable Cities. And this week, we launched a new focus group on AI for natural disaster management, collaborating with the UN Environment and WMO. So we are really enjoy of these the initiatives. I wish to highlight is a really good time with Brett, you explained such a fast movement. This movement should be encouraged the global initiative, how we can collaborate together. So ITU as a UN system, UN special agency, we are ready to serve as a common platform to collaborate with the public and private domains. So this is what my view on this subject.
No, thank you, and we're glad that we have this. They had this platform because this whole pandemic showed how urgent it really was. Sometimes you need something like this to sort of shine a light on how the world needs to get together. So thank you for all that you do. Okay, so back to Brett. I feel like a little ping pong match here. So the pandemic response challenge was a true partnership between Cognizant and XPRIZE and ITU and Oxford. Would you say that this partnership is novel in your experience, Brett? And if so, how do you see this example influencing the way you'll go about future collaborations? Obviously, besides wanting now to work with XPRIZE and ITU and Oxford on everything.
Yeah, it is novel, and not that we don't all partner across the industry all the time, but pre-pandemic, collaboration was at a glacial pace. It's something you do to define something. You have working groups. 3 years later, you produce something, and everyone feels that they participated. But what I see now more is almost a pop-up mentality of collaboration. An urgent issue comes, people rally together, the community or the network they have that could work on that problem, and we begin working. I also noticed that, perhaps it's a bright spot in the fact that we're all remote right now, we're able to get on the phone or get on video immediately. We didn't have to plan trips, coordinate events, decide when we're all going to be in the same city. We didn't do any of that. We just got on the phone or got on video and said, let's do this and let's talk again on Tuesday. And we just kind of plowed ahead. It became agile sprints driven by people who were not gated by travel, who had a shared vision. And it's really inspiring to me. It's how I want to collaborate going forward. There's lots of room for face-to-face, and I miss that as well. But decisions happened at the speed of video. They didn't happen at the speed of travel. And that was a big plus. I think having shared common vision as well was good. And I also think we did this in a way that it wasn't high investment for long-term return. It was small investment for quick return, that agility. And I think it allowed companies and all of us to come together without a ton of bureaucracy. And instead, it was just obvious what the right thing to do was. I can't even tell you how positive and collaborative the discussions were with us in AWS, that we turned things around just so quickly on what could be done. We each kind of approached this from that mindset of what can we each do to help, not what do I want from you. And when you approach it from how can we each help, everyone had a different role to play, and we all knew what our role was, and it was clear. And some helped more than others, but we were all in it together. And so as we look at other problems going ahead, I see a ton of ways for us to replicate that model. And it may be different, partners in each different problem we work together on. But I'm going to take this with me from now on how to approach problems better.
Right. I love your term, pop-up mentality of collaboration. That's really interesting. And, hopefully people realize that you can turn and you can be agile and you can have a pop-up mentality and collaborate on a dime like that when it's needed. So I do like that term, and I'm going to steal it from you and use it at some point in time. So Chesab, I have a similar question for you. AI for Good has been operating for over 4 years now. Could you share with us how collaborations like this might inspire the future direction of the AI for Good program?
Yeah, to my knowledge, to my memory, around, I think it's until 5 or 6 years ago, the public communities like UN systems or some of public communities generally raised concerns about the AI, some of machine learning robots, while hesitating to look at positive side, such as we have a remove humans or steal the jobs and ethical behaviors, something like that. So ITU as a UN agency, special agency on ICT developments, so we approached of this issue to look at positive side since year 2016. That is why we called AI for good. At the beginning, it was very challenging. Even inside IT, it was very challenging. You have to take into account of this negative side. We received many, many comments. I want to say AI for Good Global Summit contributed to initiate such a dialogue, how we can look at this AI machine learning to use in good directions. And we contributed to set the platform to deal with this the positive side, to look at the positive side. So like AI and data for common good and public benefit. This is good motivation. AI for Good Summit is dealing with many areas in these objectives like health, including pandemic, environmental aspect, educations, but mostly mainly subjects to meet all these UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we are adding now something subject on the culture and the art experience aspect. So this summit is transformed since the last year to always online, all year round. So which allows us better flexibility in terms of these issues and the formats. In addition, more reachability to the world. Not necessarily need to come to Geneva, everybody, such expensive areas. So taking into account of this COVID pandemic, and we are very serious, it's very huge negative influence to the SDGs. We are very keen, UN system is very much concerned about that. COVID has a serious influence or something, the withdraw back of this SDGs in around 10 years. So the summit is now being challenged to bring up this problem owners and the solution providers together to find out, to meet all these people's and the public's need. So this, since the last year, so AI for Good continue go in action now. So this is our futurist direction for the moment.
Yeah, that's great. And I really, personally, I've seen over 4 years being involved that you have been really moved the dialogue forward around AI for good. And you're so right that, it was confined, there was a small group that we were there for a week, in Geneva, and it was amazing from morning through night. But now to be able to open up this conversation and this dialogue with the world, it's amazing, sort of the impact and how much farther you can move things forward. So congratulations on that. So I have a question for both of you, and you could decide whoever wants to answer first. So we certainly saw some great innovations that came out of the challenge from the pandemic response teams. Where else do you think we can apply predictive models for public good? Can each of you list other applications of this form of innovation? And it could either be addressing COVID-19 or, areas beyond the pandemic.
I'll jump in on that.
Sure.
We live in a world which is extremely chaotic, and I think we've all come to recognize the change, the rate of change accelerating around us over the last year. But it's not that it didn't change before; it's that we didn't have the tools and methods to deal with change, so we kind of ignored it, and then it became front and center for us. The variations in infection rates and the policies changing rapidly around us, and the effect it had on business and society. But when you look at this, there's other things going on around us as well, whether it's access to education, whether it's dealing with addiction and pockets of addiction around the world, whether it's environmental impacts or energy. Look at the energy issues that occurred in Texas during weather. How do we better optimize the production and distribution of energy? How do we enable improvements in the environment? How do we live in a shared world that has all these chaotic pockets all over the place, deal with better prediction and better prescription of what the best things to do are to improve it for all of us? So I see a lot of problems. I think the key is looking for problems that have the right rate of change where you can predict and then also determine whether you helped in a near enough time frame. If you tackle problems that take 10 years to see a result, while those are important problems, AI is going to be harder to see the impact of it. If you look at things that have, a month, 2 months, a year levels of impacts, the predictive models are also easier to refine and improve over time. So you have to pick the right problems, but I have no question that AI for good is extremely relevant because it helps us better predict and adapt to changing data, changing conditions and environments, and these all touch on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I showed this what Brett you listed out. I think it's that health domain is the most serious part of this, especially taking into account this COVID environment. And if I want to say of this something, geographical locations, those communities, COVID now is informed us. There's no specific geographical differentiations. Even say community, even one country, even very well developed countries, there are some of communities is really behind of this touch from the healthcare. So we have to take into account of this. Health is most serious, but that's also naturally so influence to the education areas. Those are situation is getting worse to continue this education, which might be seriously impact for the future. That would be one of the subjects we utilize of this, our capabilities, how we can prospect of this, the future situation of this educations. So I too, we are continuing this and the health domains and educations, but with the name of this smarter cities. Smarter city is one of the subjects to address this in local levels, like the city level communities, to apply all these cases. And in addition, we are recently seriously challenged from our members, what is the influence of this environment? So environment, while we are combating with this COVID, there are many things, some are kind of some of the other side of this coin. We have some of it negative influence to the environmental aspect, like many masks is now becoming trash to everywhere, some of influence to the natural life. So we have to address on that. And also, as I said before, natural disaster the management. We are foreseeing of some how we can better prospect of this the natural disaster. Is it assuming of this on top of this COVID, if we have any country like Indonesia very recently having such a natural disaster, how they overcome, how they survive of such environment. So that could be the important subject areas, how we utilize of this.
I just want to jump on that a little bit. So Jason, one of the things you touched on was how volatile things can be and how something that happens in one place can affect somewhere else. What we all have to get better at is using data to see the signals that are indicative of problems that occur. Tweets and discussion happening in Hong Kong can have effects all over the world. Lots of things that happen can be early indicators, for example, of what's going on, from weather or other effects. I know, for example, there's hundreds of thousands of volunteers who run their own weather stations simply to provide data back to the collective good so we can see things that are happening. I think these signals are indicative of what's going on in education and civil unrest and all the challenges that face us, and we live on a shared environment. And so I think what people have often missed was they looked in their own part of the world, and I think what you touched on was really the need to look across and to use data and AI to help us do that.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually, as a follow-on to that, I think it's timely. I'm going to go a little rogue here, and because I do see a question in the chat that I'm going to bring up now because I think it's timely. So Marco Karugi, and sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, he asked, what are the approaches you have identified in your experience with COVID for timely and efficient transfer of learnings among different localities. So this is to your point of like this different signals and how do you transfer these learnings?
One of the things I really admired during this pandemic challenge, but also just generally as a technologist, is there are platforms for sharing that already exist, and people do use them. It's just that they didn't really leverage them fully. But what Oxford did with their data sets, they had volunteer armies collecting, scrubbing, looking at Twitter and everything else to really produce the data. And then they shared it outbound, via GitHub that all of us could consume.
Mm-hmm.
We took that data without any, investment or decisions, and we built models. And then we published those models on the internet completely for free for everyone to see. We weren't doing it commercially. We just did it because the internet was an available platform to use. And it was easier to express what we were doing by showing the models and letting people actually interact with the models. And then we published, papers out to the, public sharing environments that are all used around the AI community. I think if we use the vehicles that exist and focus more on publishing and sharing, we will find so much help, volunteer help and extra help, and also find new talent out there who is just hungry to innovate. If we could get them access to data and give them environments in which to share.
Yeah, I fully concur with what Brett said. As soon as possible, we have to utilize our existing platforms as much as possible. Especially, we are very keen to how we can extend the use of this mobile platform, because most of these community peoples use, even still half of the population is not connected yet. But so we are very keen to support of that. The most, I think it's a mobile platform is the most useful platforms. Taking, for example, you may imagine of this, if you can distribute some of health related, how protect of this COVID through the mobile phones with something minimum financial service, financial availability, many people, much more people save of their life. So this is one of the examples. I think is we have to quickly address all this, how we can bestly deploy of this the service over our existing platforms.
Great, thank you both. So, okay, so we've been talking about like key learnings from the pandemic response challenge. So our vision is to continue efforts towards using AI for both the common good and public benefit. So to do so, we're planning to create a public service utility where a global community of innovators and thought leaders can continue to enhance and to utilize a collection of data and AI, both in the context of current and future pandemics. So Brett, let me ask you a question. We talked a lot about collaboration. How can we gather a global community to continue to support the creation of an always-on resilience prediction machine? You're muted, Brett.
I am. That's an interesting and global challenge. I think if you look across, I'll go back to something that's been around for a long time. The SETI at Home program was a lot of people who got together because they cared about looking for intelligent life in the universe. And then since then, other global initiatives have come through, like the World Community Grid, which is used to help, using screensaver time and workload on laptops to help compute and help find medications and drugs. I think the potential for all people to collaborate is there. And I think the intent is there. I think people actually want to. And when I looked at what Oxford did, I saw the initiative they took to share data. Each of us knows things about the world, and whether we're using mobile applications to generate and create and share data, whether we're publishing data we have access to, I think the real value will come as we motivate people to do so more. And so I think it's on all of us to help build a collaborative mindset and help people see the potential and value of it. And I think platforms, as the public ones that we've talked about already, encouraging people to use them. And then also for each of us to give the freedom to those who have the ability to get value from this, like data scientists, give them the freedom and the room to do a little bit of work with this. I look back to the early days of the web and how innovative people were when they start to learn HTML and the types of information people shared in the beginning, purely on their own time. And even today, much of the content on the internet is generated for free by people because they care about something. The fact is we know things. That's the data we produce and we understand. And if we can help people to share it, data scientists and others can put that to work and generate amazing insights.
Yeah, thank you. I love your example of SETI because I do believe the truth is out there as an X-Files fan, right? So Chesa, how would you imagine this effort aligning with the UN mandate to provide benefits of AI to all member countries and their citizens?
UN has many mandates, but I believe one of the basic mission of the UN system is bring global benefits in secure and safe without anyone and any place behind. This is my general understanding. So this is why UN agreed to set the theme and detailed projects called Sustainable Development Goals, which is an objective at year 2030. So this project required most of UN organizations active engagement and involvement with a partnership with the private communities. So in this regard, I believe such kind of effort is a way to use of these UN systems is extending such collaborations among related UN organizations. If we can success of that, I believe it's a way to extend such value in the global scale in more safe and secure ways. So I think as ITU, we are already, as you know, this AI for Good Global Summit, already we have 36 UN organizations became our partners. So we are working together. So we want to extend, according to the subject, extend as many as possible with the UN colleagues. So I believe this is a very good way to meet of this UN mandate for public goods.
Perfect, thank you. And I have a last question for both of you. So we have this amazingly diverse audience on the webinar today. If there was a call to action around continuing this effort that you'd like to throw out to this group, what would that be?
So you mentioned earlier that I chair a council on responsible AI, and Chesa talked so well about how important it is to look at the good side of AI. For this community, for this wider audience, I think our definition of responsible AI is to make sure that sometimes there are places you shouldn't use AI because it can cause harm. However, it's also irresponsible to not use AI when you can get better insights, save lives, improve society. I guess I would challenge everyone to really rethink what they define as responsible AI. I think it's effectively almost malpractice to not consult with AI systems on highly complex problems and to consider where you should be using them and challenge yourself to make sure that you're not making decisions from gut feel or historical models, but really whether there's a better way using data and AI to make the decisions that matter in your life, in your business, in your society. It's on all of us to really elevate responsible AI.
Very true.
Yeah, I wanna ask, crowdsourcing is not only for crowding of this resource. We want crowd knowledge. We want crowd experience. So I want to challenge to all the webinar audience. If you have any experience, even small, tiny is okay. You don't know how this small experience is influence applied to how many communities. We have no idea about this power of this our experience. So I want to invite you, if you have any experience, any solutions, don't hesitate to bring up this issue to share with others. I believe this in this regard, AI for Good is good platforms. We are ready to working together. We are ready to listening. We are ready to broadcasting your ideas, sharing with others. So I want to encourage all this audience to be brave, be challenged, to bring over your experience.
Wow, I couldn't have ended it better myself. Thank you, Jason. We didn't even plan that, but that was great. And I wanted to thank you. I want to thank you both so much. This was such a fascinating conversation. There was nonstop food for thought. We can go on. And the good thing is we'll be having 2 more webinars, but I really want to turn the floor over now to my colleague, Andrew Tauhert. He's the VP of Partnerships at XPRIZE, and he will talk to you about upcoming activities. So once again, big hand. Thank you so much, Brett and Chase. It was really a pleasure and always great to speak to you. And my brain is spinning right now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you again, Brett and Chase. It was a enthralling to listen to and energizing moving forward. But that's exactly the point. We even had a question that already came into the chat asking this very thing as well, as how can you get involved? You heard Chase's call to action, but we're also beyond everything he said, which we're always welcome to. We are putting some structure and a program around this. So let me share my screen here for a couple of the logistical items. So we are planning, this is really part one of three-part series, and we have 2 more webinars coming up. We're still working out the exact specifics, but here's roughly what we're looking at, March 25th and March 31st. The next one is really to really understand what those teams that Amir had showed you, Valencia and JSI before, to get to meet them, to understand what they built, how they went about it, what their journey was like, even some interesting experience they've had dealing with public health and building these tools and making them available to public health. The second one would be is really about the partners and the ecosystem that came together. You saw the slide earlier, which listed everybody from Cognizant to AWS, WorldQuant, Intel. Well, a lot of these players are, of course, not only pivotal in making this happen, but also could be pivotal in driving this forward. So you're going to see some more coming shared in that. I'd like to, what we're going to be doing in beyond these webinars is we are putting together a program, as Amir had said, or as Susan had said, that it is designed with the premise of being a public service utility, if you will. So I'll plant the seed right now that if there's any of you in the audience that would like to contribute AI models or help in the building of those, just like our competitors on this prize did, we are going to open it up towards other forms of contribution, ideally in an open source environment, which is what we'll be standing up. B, data sets or the identification of data sets. The Oxford data set was pivotal in executing on this plan. Without that, we wouldn't have had the baseline with which to build these models, but it doesn't end there. These could be data sets that help us apply models like this towards specific applications or extend them and continue to train and validate them. 3 would be people or organizations who have skill sets that can help us in the building of this platform, in assembling this, expertise in AI and ML that we can do this collation and ensembling of models. And then lastly, any other organizations that can just help get behind the cause and give it a voice. We've left here on the slide some contact information if you'd like to express an interest to be part of this. Obviously joining the next webinars is one of the next steps as well. And of course, you'll see that showing up on the AI for Good program here. So thank you for any interest and contributions that you can make. We'd love to make this a platform of resilience that continues well beyond this, and treat this event that we had with these last 4 months simply as the starting point. So thank you again. I'll leave you that. I think at this point, I'll hand it back over to my colleagues at ITU. Fred, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for that. So at the beginning of the session, I promised an action-oriented session, and I think at the end we can all agree that XPRIZE and Cognizant and ITU and colleagues definitely delivered on that. So what a great discussion, and I'd like to say a big thank you to the panelists and to the moderators, as well as the participants for making the discussion so engaging and interactive. We had lots of great questions. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to highlight a few things that are coming up on our radar. Like Andrew said, stay tuned for part 2 and part 3 of this pandemic response challenge, our webinars, where we'll be looking at the winners of the challenge and some learnings, as well as working with Oxford and WorldQuant and looking at data and how we can discuss next steps to take us forward. So I believe all the links on how to get engaged are in the chat, so please sign up if you're interested. Also, we have some sessions coming up weekly. The next session is on trustworthy AI, and that's being organized with the head of AI from Fraunhofer Institute and Google Brain. And also on April 7th, we would have a session on AI and sustainable transformation in smart cities, mobility, and energy on April 7th. Before signing off, I'd like to ask my colleague to put up a quick poll, if he could put it on the screen. And simply put, it's we would like to ask you, how likely are you to recommend this webinar to a friend or a colleague, or how unlikely, actually? So 10 being the highest score, very likely. It will take 2 seconds of your time, and don't worry, the poll is confidential, so be honest and feel free to share your thoughts. And we'll, of course, use this to improve all further sessions. So with that, we've reached the end of the webinar, and we'd like to once again thank everyone involved, our panel, our participants, our partners, our sponsors, and of course our co-convener, Switzerland. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Selector, rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector, rewind selector.